In April 2020, in the midst of a global shutdown, one of the most ambitious projects in media history was launched. It was called Quibi. It raised $1.75 billion before it had a single user. Its leadership was a royal court of Hollywood and Silicon Valley titans, Jeffrey Katzenberg, the legendary Disney and DreamWorks chairman, and Meg Whitman, the CEO who scaled eBay. The vision was singular: to revolutionize entertainment with quick bites, high-end, 10-minute movies for your phone. The talent was A-list: Spielberg, Guillermo del Toro, Jennifer Lopez. It was, by every metric, a tower built to reach the heavens. 6 months later, in October 2020, Quibi was shut down. The $1.75 billion tower had collapsed into dust. Why? Why do brilliant projects led by brilliant people fail so catastrophically? We see this story every day. The billion-dollar startup that implodes, the next big thing that vanishes, the revolutionary idea that dies in a committee room. We are told these are modern failures. Failures of market research, of timing, of leadership. But this isn't a new story. This is humanity's oldest story of organizational failure. This is the Tower of Babel. Welcome to Hindsight Lore. Today, we are decoding the Babel myth, not as a religious text, but as a timeless, psychological, and strategic blueprint for the collapse of every ambitious project. We will analyze why perfect alignment is a psychological trap, how the confusion of language is a precise metaphor for the corporate silos that kill innovation, and, most critically, how to spot the warning signs of the Babel curse in your own company, your team, or your life before it is too late. Because Quibi did not fail in 2020. It failed 5,000 years ago in the land of Shinar. This is the code of collapse. The story from Genesis is deceptively simple. After the Great Flood, humanity settled in a plain called Shinar. And the text says they were one people and they had one language. Think about that phrase. One people, one language. This is the dream state of every founder, every CEO, every project manager. It is the idealized garage phase of a startup. It is a state of perfect, frictionless alignment, a unified vision, a single shared culture. When Steve Jobs and Wozniak were in their garage, they spoke one language. When the Quibi leadership team first assembled, flush with $1.75 billion, they believed they spoke one language: revolutionize mobile video. In this state, friction is zero. Progress is exponential. The group's ambition becomes singular. And so they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. This is the birth of the super project. But let's apply the Hindsight Lore lens. The traditional interpretation calls this sinful, an act of arrogance, of hubris, of humanity trying to reach God. But this interpretation is incomplete. The failure of Babel is not a moral failure. It is a structural one. The sin is not the ambition to build the tower. The sin is the arrogance of believing that a complex system can be run forever by a simple, singular vision. It is the denial of a fundamental law of the universe: entropy. Entropy dictates that all ordered systems will, over time, move toward chaos. In physics, it's the heat death of the universe. In organizations, it's the inevitable drift of communication, culture, and vision as you add more and more people. The builders of Babel believed their one language was permanent. They thought they could scale their garage phase to the heavens. They confused alignment with permanence. The Quibi leadership team did the same. They believed their one language formed in the boardrooms of Hollywood was the same one language the market spoke. They believed the language of A-list directors was the same language as a 19-year-old on TikTok. They were wrong. This is the first crack in the foundation. The belief that your vision is so pure, so singular, that it is immune to the pressures of complexity and scale. But if this perfect unity is the goal, why was the solution to this perceived arrogance not a lightning bolt, but something far more subtle? And what does this ancient punishment reveal about the fatal flaw hidden inside the very systems we build today? The story continues. The project is a success. The tower is rising. And then the entity of God in the story, the ultimate system administrator, observes this. Behold, the people are one, and they have all one language, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. This line is critical. It's an admission that the system works. That perfect alignment is a superpower. So, what does the system administrator do? He doesn't destroy the tower. He doesn't smite the builders. He performs a strategic, psychological intervention. He says, "Let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." And so the Lord scattered them abroad, and they left off to build the city. Let's decode this. The Babel curse is not a divine, supernatural act. It is a metaphor for the single most inevitable, predictable, and destructive force in any growing organization, the failure of communication. At scale, confounding the language is the inescapable result of complexity. Think of your own organization. When it was just 5 people, you had one language. You could finish each other's sentences. The mission was clear. Then you hired 50 people. Suddenly, sales speaks a different language from engineering. Engineering speaks a different language from marketing. Marketing speaks a different language from legal. They are all, in theory, building the same tower. They all, in theory, work for the same company, but their languages have been confounded. This is the birth of the corporate silo. A silo is, by definition, a place where a new language has formed. A language of specific metrics, specific acronyms, specific priorities, and specific short-term goals. And this is precisely what happened at Quibi. Reports from inside the $1.75 billion collapse are a perfect modern translation of the Babel text. At Quibi, you had 2 gods, 2 CEOs, Jeffrey Katzenberg, Hollywood, and Meg Whitman, Silicon Valley. Katzenberg's language was content. He spoke in terms of A-list stars, cinematic quality, and the movie. Whitman's language was technology. She spoke in terms of data, metrics, platform, and the app. In theory, they were building the same tower. In reality, they were speaking 2 completely different languages. The Hollywood team, under Katzenberg, operated in a traditional, top-down, secretive studio model. The Silicon Valley team, under Whitman, expected a fast, iterative, data-driven, agile environment. The result? Chaos. The tech team had no idea what kind of content was being made. The content team had no idea how the technology would present it. Here's one concrete fatal example. The language of Hollywood says, protect the content. It is sacred. The language of the modern web says, share the content, make it viral. Quibi launched, without a basic ability for users to screenshot or share clips. They were building a mobile-first platform that was fundamentally anti-social. Why? Because the language of Katzenberg's team, anti-piracy, IP protection, was a foreign, confounded language to the needs of the user virality, sharing memes. The builders could no longer understand each other's speech, and so they left off to build the city. Notice, the tower wasn't destroyed. It didn't fall. It was abandoned. It died from misalignment. It died from strategic friction. It died from 1,000 small cuts of misunderstanding. The project didn't fail. The communication did. So, the Babel curse is not a divine act. It is a systemic one. It is a predictable virus that infects every project that tries to scale. It is alive in every company, every government, and perhaps even in our own ambitious projects. The question, then, is not if the curse will strike. The question is when. And how do we, as modern strategists, spot the warning signs? The story of Babel is not just a diagnosis. It is a field manual for spotting organizational failure before the collapse. There are 3 critical warning signs that the Babel curse is active in your system. First, worshiping the tower over the language, vision. This is the first and most dangerous sign. It's the moment when the act of building becomes more important than the reason for building. It's when your metrics, your KPIs, your growth become the goal itself, completely disconnected from the original shared why. The builders of Babel said, "Let us make a name for ourselves." Their goal shifted. It was no longer about a shared home, a city. It became about a symbol of ego, a tower to the heavens. They fell in love with the project, not the purpose. This is Quibi personified. The project's success was defined by its tower, $1.75 billion. This was the only thing anyone talked about. The metric of success was the money raised, not the problem solved. Katzenberg and Whitman were building a tower. They were making a name for themselves. They became so focused on the scale of the ambition, they forgot to ask if anyone actually wanted it. They worshipped the tower, and in doing so, they lost the one language they once shared with their audience. When your company meetings are 90% about what you are building, features, deadlines, scale, and 10% about why the curse is upon you. Second, the rise of empty language. This is the symptom. When the confounding begins, people do not stop communicating. Instead, they invent a new artificial language to mask the lack of shared meaning. We call this corporate buzzwords: synergy, disruption, core competency, leveraging, circle back, mission driven. This is empty language. It is language that sounds like alignment, but has no concrete, shared, operational definition. It is the illusion of communication. When a CEO says, "We need to leverage our core competencies to create disruptive synergies," what does that mean? To the engineer, it means nothing. To the marketer, it means nothing. It is the modern confounding. It is noise, disguised as signal. Quibi's internal language was a classic example. Their core idea was turnstile, a technology that lets you flip your phone from horizontal to vertical, and the video would seamlessly adapt. This was their one language. They poured hundreds of millions of dollars into it, but it was an empty language. It was a technological solution to a problem nobody had. They disrupted an industry that didn't want to be disrupted in that way. They leveraged A-list talent for a format that didn't fit them. The language was empty because it was disconnected from reality. When you sit in a meeting and you hear the buzzwords piling up, you are not in a meeting. You are at the foot of the Tower of Babel. Third, the singularity fallacy. This is the most subtle and tragic sign. It is the belief that the original one language, the vision from the 10-person garage, can and should apply perfectly to the 10,000-person organization without translation. This is the fallacy of the founder's vision. The vision that creates a company is almost never the vision that can scale it. The language of a 10-person team is high context, intuitive, and fast. The language of a 10,000-person organization must be low context, explicit, documented, and systemic. Babel's collapse was a translation failure. The original architect's vision could not be translated effectively to the 10,000th bricklayer. The why was lost in the how. This was the final, fatal failure of Quibi. Jeffrey Katzenberg's vision was singular, the next generation of Hollywood. But that language was never translated for the new reality. He never translated his vision for a product team. Result? The app was clunky and anti-social. He never translated his vision for a market team. Result? They tried to sell a premium product to a free generation TikTok and YouTube. He never translated his vision for a user. Result? No one knew what Quibi was. A streaming service? A social app? A thing? When the launch failed, Katzenberg's language became confounded. He infamously blamed the failure on the global pandemic. He was speaking the language of an old world studio boss. The market was speaking the language of a new world. and they could not understand one another's speech. The singularity fallacy is what prevents a founder from letting go. It's the belief that their one language is the only one that matters. It is the arrogance of Babel in a modern suit. So, we are cursed. The story of Babel is not a myth. It is a diagnosis of an incurable human condition. The moment we align, we begin to drift. The moment we build, we begin to decay. The moment we scale, we begin to fail. So what is the lesson? Is the moral of Babel simply don't be ambitious, don't build towers, stay in your garage? No, that is the coward's interpretation. The lesson of Hindsight Lore, the strategic lesson, is far more profound. The lesson of Babel is not don't be ambitious. The lesson is ambition must be relentlessly balanced by a painful, expensive, and continuous investment in translation. The antidote to the Babel curse is not a master language. It is not forcing everyone to speak the founder's one language. That is tyranny, and it is fragile. The antidote is building a robust system of translation. What does this mean? It means that in your organization, your most important department is translation. It means strong, empowered middle management, not as bosses, but as chief translators who can take the C-suite's why, language 1, and translate it into the what for the YC engineering team, language 2. It means clear, living documentation, not as a rule book, but as a shared Rosetta Stone. So the language of sales and the language of legal can be mutually understood. It means a constant, obsessive rearticulation of the why. You don't just align once, you must realign every single day. A successful, scaled organization is not a monolith speaking one language. It is a thriving ecosystem of different, specialized languages. With world-class, high-speed translators connecting them all, the Quibi Tower collapsed because it had no translators. It had two kings, Katzenberg and Whitman, shouting at each other from two different, unconnected towers of their own. They built a $1.75 billion monument to a failure of translation. The story of Babel is, in the end, a warning. It is a 5,000-year-old warning against confusing scale with strength. It is a warning against confusing ambition with vision. It is a warning against confusing communication with connection. True strength is not building the tallest tower. True strength is building a shared reality that is robust enough to withstand the weight of it. So, look at your own ambitious projects. Look at your team, your company, your life. Are you truly building a shared vision? Or are you, like the builders of Babel, just making noise and calling it a language?